On the bitter morning of January 30, 1925, a wiry explorer named William Floyd Collins, age 37, crawled into the narrow mouth of Sand Cave near Cave City, Kentucky. Collins was already well known among local cavers. Years earlier, he had discovered Crystal Cave, a stunning labyrinth of passages he hoped to turn into a tourist attraction. Yet Crystal Cave lay too far from the main roads to draw crowds, and Collins's dream of fortune slipped away. Now, in the middle of the fierce Kentucky cave wars, he searched for a new route that might connect Sand Cave to the great Mammoth Cave system. If such a passage existed, Collins believed it would make him famous and finally secure prosperity for his struggling family. Armed with only a lantern, ropes, and the grit of long experience, he wriggled deep into a chute of damp limestone. Outside, the winter wind cut through the farmland. Inside, the blackness pressed close, broken only by the faint glow of his lamp. He could not have known that this descent would trap him in a struggle witnessed by the entire nation. Sand Cave did not appear remarkable from the outside. Its entrance was a low, shadowed hole in a hillside, framed by frostbitten weeds and the thin branches of winter trees. Yet once inside, the cave revealed its true character: tight crawlways, ceilings that scraped shoulders, and chambers filled with loose sandstone blocks, waiting to shift at the smallest vibration. The temperature remained near freezing, and the air hung with dampness. Water dripped in a steady rhythm from the ceiling, leaving the rock slick beneath Collins's elbows and knees. Above ground, the weather had turned unpredictable. A thaw followed recent snows, and nearby fields sagged under meltwater. The hills absorbed this moisture like a sponge, slowly feeding it into the caves below. For an experienced explorer like Collins, such conditions were familiar, even ordinary. He had squeezed through narrow cracks many times before and trusted his instincts to guide him. His equipment, however, was modest. A kerosene lantern flickered at his side, casting orange halos against stone walls. A rope, a small chisel, and a few sandwiches formed the rest of his kit. He wore no helmet, no protective padding standard at the time, but woefully inadequate by later standards. Each movement forward meant pressing his body flat against cold rock, inching through spaces barely wider than his chest. There were hints of danger that day: the faint shifting of rubble beneath his boots, the chill of water seeping under his clothes, the gritty rattle of small stones dropping into the void. Still, these were dismissed as routine discomforts. Collins's focus was fixed on the possibility of glory, of finding a new artery leading toward the fabled Mammoth Cave system. To the untrained eye, Sand Cave seemed nothing more than a damp curiosity on a Kentucky farm. But for those who dared to crawl inside, its silence carried a different weight, a silence broken only by drips, by the scrape of stone on fabric, by the quickened breath of a man pursuing a dream. Behind its plain entrance waited passages that could shift without warning, ready to turn an ambitious search into a fatal trap. By late afternoon, on January 30, 1925, Collins had crawled more than 150 feet into Sand Cave. The passage narrowed to a chute just 18 inches high, forcing him to twist his body sideways. Ahead, a small chamber seemed to open, and he tried to chip away at a slab of rock that blocked the path. His lantern sputtered, shadows darting across jagged walls. Then it happened. A rock the size of a small anvil shifted under his weight. With a grinding snap, it collapsed downward and pinned his left leg against the cave wall. The shock drove the breath from his chest. He clawed at the stone, but it would not budge. The cold limestone pressed mercilessly into his ankle, locking him in place. At first, Collins believed he could free himself. He tugged, twisted, tried to lever his body backward, but every movement only wedged the stone tighter. Dust filled his mouth, and the hiss of dripping water seemed suddenly louder, echoing his shallow gasps. His lantern's glow shrank to a trembling halo, throwing his trapped body into stark relief against the blackness. He shouted, his voice ricocheting through the low passage. "Help!" The cry rattled up the crawlway, muffled by rock. Above ground, no one heard. Hours later, a local farmer named Johnny Gerald, who had accompanied him earlier, realized Collins had not emerged. Crawling into the passage, Gerald spotted the faint glow of the lantern far below. His calls were answered by a strained voice. Collins explained that his leg was caught and he could not move. Gerald tried to squeeze closer, but the chute was too tight for two men. He backed out, alarm rising, and hurried to summon help. Inside, Collins faced the reality of his situation. The cave pressed in on every side. His chest scraped stone each time he drew breath. Darkness beyond the flickering lantern seemed to throb with menace. He imagined the walls creeping closer, shrinking, crushing. He tried to keep calm, whispering prayers, but fear came in waves, sudden, suffocating. The first rescuers arrived carrying ropes and lanterns. One by one, they attempted the crawl. Some reached him, passed him blankets, even tried to chip at the rock pinning his ankle. But the space was too cramped for leverage. Their tools slipped, sparks flared, dust choked the narrow shaft. Each attempt ended in failure. Collins grew exhausted. His throat was raw from shouting. When rescuers spoke to him, his replies faltered between determination and panic. At times he tried to joke, masking the terror rising in his chest. At other times, he fell into silence, his eyes fixed on the lantern flame as if it were the only thread keeping him tethered to the world outside. Above, the winter sun fell. Cold seeped deeper into the rock. The temperature dropped, and moisture condensed into beads on the ceiling, dripping steadily onto his face. He could no longer shift to avoid them. Each drop was an icy reminder of time passing. As night closed in, the reality spread among the rescuers. Floyd Collins was wedged in a stone coffin, his ankle locked by hundreds of pounds of rock. To free him would require more than muscle and determination. It would demand a battle against geology itself. The cave had swallowed him, and for the first time, the rescuers felt the weight of dread. The race against darkness, against weather, against death had begun. Word spread quickly across rural Kentucky. By the following morning, dozens of neighbors, cavers, and curious farmers crowded near the entrance to Sand Cave. They brought shovels, lanterns, and ropes, convinced that together they could pull Floyd Collins free. At first, the atmosphere was almost hopeful. Men wriggled into the chute carrying blankets and food, calling down encouragement. Collins responded weakly, his voice echoing back through the stone. The early efforts, however, collapsed under the weight of the cave itself. Rescuers tried chiseling at the rock pinning his ankle, but dust and falling debris threatened to bury him further. Others tugged at his arms, but each pull only twisted his body painfully against the walls. The narrow tunnel, barely large enough for one man, turned every attempt into a slow, suffocating ordeal. By the second day, professional miners and engineers arrived. They debated options, continue to chip away in the crawl space, or attempt something far more drastic, digging a vertical shaft from the hillside above to reach him from behind. The first plan seemed faster, but treacherous. The roof of the passage was crumbling. Each vibration brought a shower of sand and gravel. On February 4, a major collapse blocked the main passage entirely, sealing Collins in a pocket of stone. Outside, panic turned to strategy. The decision was made: dig a rescue shaft. It would be 55 feet deep, descending directly into the chamber behind Collins. Tools were primitive. Pickaxes rang out against frozen ground. Steam shovels could not be used. The terrain was too fragile. Volunteers rotated in shifts, their breath steaming in the cold air as they hauled bucket after bucket of mud and rock to the surface. Meanwhile, communication with Collins grew sporadic. Before the collapse, visitors had squeezed close enough to pass him a lamp, coffee, even words of comfort. Among them was young reporter William Skeets Miller, his small frame allowing him to crawl near. Miller's dispatches electrified readers across the country. In Louisville, Cincinnati, New York, newspapers printed hour-by-hour updates. Radios carried bulletins of the desperate fight to save a man trapped under Kentucky farmland. With the media came crowds. By the end of the week, thousands of onlookers camped along the ridge, their bonfires flickering against the winter sky. Food vendors, souvenir sellers, even carnival barkers arrived. What began as a rescue turned into a strange fairground of human curiosity. The Kentucky National Guard was summoned to maintain order. Down below, the shaft sank slowly. Men worked through freezing nights, battling fatigue and mudslides. Each foot gained seemed a small triumph, but progress was agonizingly slow. Rain began to fall, seeping into the trench, turning clay into sucking mire. Lanterns swung in the gloom as shovels clanged and timbers creaked under the pressure of unstable earth. Every obstacle multiplied the sense of dread. Would the shaft collapse before reaching Collins? Would water flood the chamber? Each time a rescuer emerged covered in mud, the waiting crowd demanded news. Each time the answer grew less certain. Inside Sand Cave, Collins fought to stay conscious. With no food, little water, and the cold gnawing at his bones, his voice weakened. Rescuers strained to hear him. Sometimes he answered with a faint joke, other times with silence that chilled the men crawling toward him. The lantern beside him burned low. Hope rose and fell with every hammer strike above ground. For a moment it seemed that sheer determination could defeat the rock. But Sand Cave had other plans. Each step closer to him revealed how fragile their progress was, how quickly victory could turn to disaster. The rescue had become a race, not just against stone and ice, but against time itself. By the second week of February, the rescue shaft had reached more than 40 feet. Men worked in 12-hour shifts, hacking through layers of clay and sandstone, each swing echoing like a clock, ticking down Collins's time. The deeper they went, the more treacherous the conditions became. Walls shuddered, mud slumped, timbers groaned under the strain. Hope clung to every foot gained, yet with each descent came new fear that the earth itself might swallow the rescuers. Above ground, the carnival atmosphere had reached its peak. Reporters filed hourly stories, hawkers sold hot peanuts and photographs, and sightseers wandered as if attending a festival. But beneath the noise lay an unspoken dread. The longer Collins remained trapped, the smaller his chances became. Every gust of winter wind seemed to carry the same question: was he still alive? On February 12, after days of digging, the shaft finally broke through into a side passage that should have led directly to Collins. The rescuers crawled in, their lanterns cutting spears of light into the blackness. The air was icy, stale, heavy with the scent of wet rock. They called his name. Only silence answered. When they reached him, the truth was undeniable. Floyd Collins lay motionless, his body twisted where the rock had pinned his ankle. His face was pale, lips slightly parted, eyes closed as if in uneasy sleep. Cold had taken him, or suffocation, or slow dehydration, perhaps all three in merciless succession. His hands, once gripping at stone, had fallen slack. The moment shattered the men who had fought so long to save him. Some wept openly in the dark, their breath fogging lantern glass. Others pressed forward, desperate to find any sign of life, a flicker, a breath. But Collins had already crossed beyond their reach. Above, when word filtered to the surface, the crowd fell silent. Thousands of voices hushed at once, the carnival atmosphere dissolving into grief. Reporters wrote, not of triumph, but of tragedy, sending headlines across the nation: Floyd Collins dead in Sand Cave. For many who had followed the ordeal, the ending felt unbearable. He had survived nearly 2 weeks entombed in the earth, long enough for hope to blossom, only for that hope to collapse like the fragile walls around him. In the shaft, rescuers lingered beside the body. They touched his shoulder gently, as if to acknowledge the courage of a man who had ventured into darkness, chasing a dream. Yet they could not bring him out immediately. The cave's instability threatened to trap more men if they tried. Collins remained in the rock chamber that had become his tomb. The rescue that began with determination and energy ended with quiet despair. There was no cheer of victory, no light at the end of the tunnel, only the still form of Floyd Collins, sealed forever in the silence of Sand Cave. In the weeks after Collins's death, Sand Cave became a place of pilgrimage. Thousands traveled to Kentucky, staring into the dark opening that had claimed his life. Some came out of grief, others out of morbid curiosity. For a time, the cave was guarded by soldiers to keep the crowds at bay. Collins's body was left underground for months before being recovered, only to be caught in a strange afterlife of public display and theft before his family finally secured a permanent burial decades later. His ordeal entered American folklore, remembered not only as a personal tragedy, but also as a national spectacle that revealed both the bravery and the failings of human response to disaster. For rescuers, the lesson was stark. Caves demanded respect. Equipment had been primitive, planning improvised, and safety sacrificed to urgency. Collins's death became a warning for future explorers that narrow passages and unstable rock were dangers not to be underestimated. Standing today at Mammoth Cave National Park, guides still recall his name. The silence around Sand Cave carries a lingering echo. Had there been better preparation, better tools, or even one different decision, Floyd Collins might have walked out alive.